An original
from Story Studio Network.
Well, here we go. It is Tuesday, May the 2nd, 2023. Lots to talk about today. And, of course, we've got the Leafs heading into round 2. All a Twitter and giddy about that here in this part of the world. And then I want to get into the conversation I had with Mike LeCouture at CTV last night. I was on with Reshmi Nair on The Debate, and we had a spirited discussion about bare minimum Mondays. It was kind of fun. Yeah. Just the whole idea of, sort of depressurizing your Monday, start to the week. All in the name of good mental health. Anyway, there's all kinds of sneering criticism. And of course, Reshmi is a, type A personality. She wasn't buying into that at all. So we'll get into that a little bit. And this whole issue of banning bags at major retailers, last week it was the LCBO. I also found this story, I think I referred to it even earlier in the year, that Walmart, with banning its bags, was posing all kinds of challenges as far as some of the shoppers were concerned. So we'll get into all of that. But we do have to start on what is a monumental and historic, sad note this morning here on this second day of May, 2023. Not very often on AM radio, you had a song that had an 18-second instrumental intro. But as soon as you heard it, you knew who it was.
But are you going to hit the post?
Oh, we're trying. Barb Digiulio with us. And, on a morning like this, it's one of those things where it kind of just stops all other conversation. The passing of Gordon Lightfoot at the age of 84. He was born the same year as my dad, 1938, November. And as I listen to this song, it takes me back to being in grade school, and the guy who taught me how to play the guitar gave me this music book. And if you know the cover of that album, there's Gord sitting in his denims with his, his cool bracelet on with the jade stones in it. But the most compelling part of it for me was that Gibson B45 Sunburst 12-string guitar. That's, of course, the signature sound of that particular song in Sundown. And there's just so many things swirling around in terms of memory. And I can point to a lot of Gordon Lightfoot songs that did that for me because I listened to it and he was at his peak in my formative years as a teenager. I don't know about you.
So I would have been a little bit younger at that time. Certainly very familiar with and remember hearing Gordon Lightfoot on the radio. I would have been more of the 80s experience. So he would have been 70s. But obviously always knew about Gordon Lightfoot. I remember, I don't know why, I have this really clear memory of hearing the Edmund Fitzgerald while my mom was driving the car. I remember hearing it on the radio. Maybe somebody commented and told me the story about what the song was about. But I found something really interesting because I was so much more in tune with the 80s music. And I was doing some reading about Gordon Lightfoot, especially the iconic song, If You Could Read My Mind, and how it was covered by hundreds of artists. From Johnny Cash to Barbra Streisand they did a Studio 54 pop music or version of it. But one of my favorite bands when I was a teenager was Duran Duran. And I just read that they have one of their songs from their 1982 album Rio called Save a Prayer, which was one of the songs that sort of made people stop and look at them as real artists and not just pop artists. The singer of the band, Simon Le Bon, said that the chorus of that song was inspired by Gordon Lightfoot's If You Could Read My Mind.
Yeah, and it's funny how you start to pull those threads, right? And the people that looked to him as a singer-songwriter, he was a rock star. I mean, in so many respects. By the time he got through the 70s and into the 80s, that's pretty much the body of the work that we remember. But he kept writing right up until recently, and he had only, I guess, a couple of years ago released a new record. Now, it wasn't the voice that we heard on that version of Sundown, surely, but the impression that he leaves as a Canadian artist, never mind just an international artist, is pretty impressive. And you know what? As we hear that discussion, it reminds me of the tributes to Leonard Cohen when he passed away, and guys the likes of Bono were just talking similarly to say, I would not have been a songwriter if it hadn't been for Leonard Cohen. And we in Canada are so self-deprecating.
Right.
It's taken us a long time to really kind of realize the depth of the talent.
And the international reach. As you're saying that, it brings to mind the band Rush. Mm-hmm. And sure. how much influence they have had around the world. Gordon Lightfoot is one of those people. He's part of Canada's fabric. And the fact that he didn't ever stop writing and continuing to create music, it just shows that artists, it's just who they are. It's not what they do while they're successful and for a certain time. It's just in them to continue creating music. So I just think it's an amazing story. And I mean, I know Gordon Lightfoot to see him as he has looked for the last couple of decades, and to look back on, as you say, some of the album covers. And I mean, he had it all, right? He had the talent, he had the voice, the look, unbelievable.
I read his biography a few years back, and our friend Hap Parnaby shows up in that story because they're both boys from Orillia. And Pete McGarvey was the head of the radio station up there in those days, and that's where they crossed paths. And Gordon Lightfoot ends up doing stuff with the radio station. Of course, the Mariposa Folk Festival was really kind of born around his celebrity. He would show up, and that was a pretty significant part of Mariposa's history is attached to Gordon Lightfoot. And they always tell the story at Mariposa about, I think it was the 1969 or 70, late 60s, it might have been 1970. And this is the day when the Mariposa Folk Festival was on the Toronto Islands. And Bruce Coburn, a young performer, new into the industry in the time, he's prepared to get up and play his set at Mariposa, and he announced to the crowd, I was going to play, but I've decided to give up my set. And there was all this booing in the crowd because everybody wanted to hear Bruce Coburn. And they, well, what are you doing? He says, well, I'm giving it up so you can hear Bob Dylan. So Bob Dylan shows up and plays. But with Bob Dylan, there's Gordon Lightfoot and Joni Mitchell and, just the heyday of sort of the Yorkville folk scene all there. And they had such an impression on Mariposa at the time. And again, its connections to Orillia originally, and Gordon Lightfoot being the Orillia boy. I remember talking to the folks at Mariposa saying, that might have been your most successful disaster ever. Because after they did that, everybody expected that to happen sort of just out of the blue organically at the festival. To be able to carry that kind of sway, like Bob Dylan's going to show up because, well, Gord's there,
Amazing. It's a great story. Yeah, he's one of those people, and we all saw, how he was older and more frail, but you always just kind of expected him to be around.
Yep. Yeah. Well, and I remember covering the story in 2002 when he was playing in Orillia, and it was, I think, January-ish. It was in the winter anyway, and played one night. Before he played the second night, he'd had these severe stomach pains. Anyway, they took him to the hospital. They ended up having to rush him to McMaster in Hamilton, and it was some kind of abdominal aneurysm. It was serious, right?
That is very serious, sure.
Yeah, for sure. And it wasn't clear whether or not he was going to get through it, and of course he did. But even there, his recovery was it was pretty slow, to say the least, and everybody was keeping tabs on him, kind of keeping a respectful distance. But the interesting thing is, he pops up in 2004. Mariposa is in Aurelia now, back in Aurelia, and out of the blue, he just shows up and does a surprise performance, sings one song, sings "I'll Tag Along," and the whole place, of course, just kind of lights up, and away they go. And then I remember that summer, we have a place, family cottage near Peterborough, and we had this heavy, heavy rain. Peterborough was flooded. The downtown was flooded. And so they had to have, they want to have a fundraiser for all the downtown businesses. And Ronnie Hawkins was involved, and Gordon Lightfoot showed up and did a five-song solo set. And there was this real kind of back to the roots feel to it. It was really interesting to see how that pivot, in terms of his health, took him from being a rock star to more, I think, being, to your point, a Canadian legend, in terms of being really incorporated and integrated into the fabric of what it is we do here.
And it's funny you say that, especially if it came that close, because any aneurysm is very dangerous and very scary, and a lot of people don't survive them. So it's almost like he probably reevaluated things for himself, and maybe Canada reevaluated, we almost lost him. Look what we have.
Yeah. I got the chance to see him a few times. My brother and I got the tickets. He used to do sort of his annual, in residence at Massey Hall. He would do his week at Massey Hall. So Kelly and I got tickets, and we went and enjoyed the show. It was terrific. But 2 other times I saw him was probably more impressive, and it was Canadian Music Week here in Toronto, and we had the whole thing was going on down at the Royal York Hotel. And for those of you not in the industry, it's really kind of an industry event, and they celebrate the various performances on radio and the music performances, etc. Lightfoot shows up, and he's going to play, he's going to perform, and it's the grand ballroom at the Royal York Hotel, and it's full of industry people. So these are hard people to impress, right? In terms of making sure that you're on your mark and performance. Lightfoot gets up, just with his Martin guitar, plugs it into his Fender amp. You could hear a pin drop, and he sings "In the Early Morning Rain."
Wow. And
the whole place stands up, right? And then the next time I saw him in that kind of place was, remember Live 8? Remember when they had the big benefit up in Barrie and at Molson Park, and it was all, the whole point was to be there to raise money for the folks in Africa and et cetera, and all this. It was really important, and they had various locations around the world. There was in London and here in Ontario. They kept saying Toronto, but of course it was Barrie. But they had this all-star lineup showing up, and of course Gordon Lightfoot wasn't on the, I don't think he was on the lineup, but I was backstage and we were reporting on it. And I thought, holy shit, that's Gordon Lightfoot. He's just kind of wandering through, and it's just like the king or the pope. I mean, they're there to kiss the ring. It was really the coolest thing to see how everybody backstage, including, Randy Bachman and Neil Young and all these guys that were there to perform, Bryan Adams. This was royalty here.
Wow.
And it was really kind of a cool thing. And he got up and he sang one song, and of course the crowd just kind of went nuts. And it was just, we had this real, more intimate relationship with him, I think, after as you point out, after his health scare.
Mm-hmm. And his songs, I don't know, not every artist is like this, but his songs immediately speak to the era, take you back to that time, the 70s, right? A lot of his songs just have that feel to them.
And they're all pretty cryptic. I mean, with the exception of a song like, the Edmund Fitzgerald, which really does tell a narrative chronologically, they're all kind of poetically cryptic. You're not quite sure, like, what's he really talking about in Sundown, right? I mean, you kinda know,
and the
but you
writing
don't
is
know.
so creative and so clever.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, I love that, you talk about kind of being ingrained in the culture. And in the 70s, we were fans of SCTV. And, of course, we would make that appointment tuning. To this day, this is my favorite shtick that they ever did on SCTV.
His name is Paul Revere.
Gordon Lightfoot, Canada's most incredible singer.
I got married to the widow next door.
KTEL introduces Gord Sings Every Song Ever Written, a remarkable 379 album set complete with music and lyrics, so you can sing along as Gord sings every song ever written. You get Midnight in Moscow, Bits and Pieces, and Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious.
Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious.
One Connemara, Mac the Knife, and Happy Birthday.
Happy birthday to you.
Now, for the first time, a special offer of unreleased Gord Lightfoot versions of some of the great songs of all time.
Good King Wenceslas looked out on the feast.
You get the Soviet national anthem, Polka Time, Jesus Joy of Man's Desiring, and of course, Gord's own 76 trombone.
76 from
Gord Lightfoot, a legend in his own time.
close behind.
Gord sings every song ever written, only $4.99. Paper cassette, $6.99. That's paper cassette, $6.99. Available everywhere.
We're just going to have to put in footnotes explaining what tapes or cassettes are. I get it, but...
Right. Yes. Never mind. What did we call the carts? Remember the carts at the radio station?
Carts. Yeah. They were 8
okay.
tracks. 8 tracks. Right. Yeah. And you'd be in the middle of a song and it would go clunk and move on to the next track and finish the song. But it was the coolest thing if you had an 8-track player in your in your car. So, yes, the passing of Gordon Lightfoot at the age of 84 and leaves a lot behind. And I found this piece on YouTube, and it's from 2016. And he is performing at Hugh's room and marking what would have been the 80th birthday of Stompin Tom Connors. And he tells this great story about seeing Stompin Tom and going to his house and having a good visit. And for those of you who don't know, Gord struggled with alcohol early in his career. And as he tells this story, he says, I've been sober, hadn't had a drink in 23 years until he went and visited Stompin' Tom one hot summer day. I'm going to put the link to the YouTube piece in the show notes because it's worth sitting down. It's 13 minutes, but he just does this really cool storytelling monologue about going out to visit Stompin' Tom Connors and a little bit of history in terms of the first time he saw him at the Horseshoe Tavern. And then he decides what song would Stompin' Tom want. Well, it was the same song that he played when he came back and played for the first time at Mariposa.
You got time enough for two of us. What is mine, I will share. We've got things that we can do without. Anytime, anywhere. Every little daydream that appears annoys you gives us some problems of our own. If you turn back to that page again, you need a friend. If you ask me, I'll tag along.
And we also know Gord was something of a Leaf fan. He was a fixture at the games often in the days of Maple Leaf Gardens, and proudly wore the Leaf jersey, sitting front and center. So the days of Darryl Sittler being the captain of the team. So it was, again, part of that important culture here in Toronto. So maybe, he was just happy to see that the Leafs made it into the second round.
I was just
Barb,
going to say that.
He was happy with that, and away we go, right?
Sometimes you hold on for certain things, right? Isn't that what you hear?
That's it. The question, if everybody's talking about, well, the Leafs have finally won, got past the first round in 19 years. I just want to point out that it's been 20 years since they got past the second round. So, this has been a rough road that the Leafs have had to hoe over the last couple of decades. Now, they were more frequently moving along in the playoffs, but this is a big deal for them. And I don't know where you were on Saturday night. We were at a fundraiser and everything stopped down to watch the overtime period, and the whole place erupted as soon as they scored that goal.
Yeah. It's funny how I don't mean this in a bad way, but how the bar has been lowered to the point where a win in the first round feels like a Stanley Cup championship in this city, right? People are out in the streets and, great for the team, good stuff. But now there are a lot of stages to get to the Stanley Cup. And it's not just about talent. It's also about energy. Fatigue often does teams in as you get further along, depending on how long your series end up going. It should be very interesting. I think that they're playing a Florida Panthers team that this is probably a pretty even match in terms of the teams going into it. I think there are a lot of interesting storylines with this.
Yeah, for sure. And, I think you'll hear all the sports know-it-alls talk about the analytics and the line matching and all that nonsense. To me, it's going to be the team that comes out and wants to win more than the other team. That's kind of it. You're just going to have it in your head that we are here to do nothing but win, period.
Look, that definitely is part of it. It is mindset. The other thing that does factor in, and going to my previous point is, and not to get into line matching or anything like that, but as you go further along and injuries happen and key players, do they end up having to leave for a number of games? We saw an interesting situation with the Leafs in the last series, and the Bunting missed 3 games, and they won those 3 games. How does the goaltending manage in sometimes inconsistent with the Leafs? I'm even talking about angles like the whole situation with Florida not wanting Leaf fans to be at the games.
I love that.
The crowd participation, like everything factors in. That's what I mean. It's not just on ice stuff. There's so many angles to what can happen.
I think that's a good thing for the Leafs, where the Florida said we don't want any Canadians or non-U.S. residents coming in here, because all of a sudden that's bulletin board stuff, right? You can stick it up there and say, well, okay, we're on our own. We're going to go and fight the battle, and they don't want to. They become the bad guy in the movie, and I think to some degree the Leafs could use that level of distraction as opposed to, well, what are they going to do to screw this one up, right?
Right. Yeah. Right. Exactly. And the other thing that Florida is not factoring in, and I don't know why, there are so many Canadians who can prove they're U.S. residents because they have places down there, and there are so many U.S. residents who will buy the tickets and have already said, I've seen it so much on Twitter, hey, I'm willing to sell, or you can use my address for Canadian fans if you want to come down. It just means Canadian fans may have to pay more because they're going to have to get the tickets from scalpers, secondhand. But it's not going to really have an effect on the number of Canadians going to the games. There are so many people who live down there, who have places down there. That's all you need to show. And a U.S. credit card. Anyone who has a place down there, no, I don't, I wish I did, has a U.S. credit card.
Yeah, and it's just the funny part about it is that, I was commenting that who would have thought that they were going to have to beat Team DeSantis twice to get through it. And I thought the best thing would have been if the governor had come out and endorsed the ban. It would have been awesome for the Leafs, right?
Yeah, I think it does work in their favor. I agree with you. It just goes to that kind of petty. It's a petty move.
Yeah, it's head games. It's you know what? It's like the kind of thing Harold Ballard would have done. Right? Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't have a problem with it. I just think that, okay, game on. Everything's on the table then. Let's go out and play.
Honestly, it screams weakness. if you're so worried about how many Leaf fans will be in the crowd, that just screams weakness. And I'm sure it's a distraction the team would rather not have. The actual
Yeah,
team
you're probably
and the
right.
players.
Yeah, the players. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Well, I was looking at the stats though in these playoffs. Like, there've been more road wins than home wins.
This has
throughout
been
the
an
entire
upside down
It's
playoff
crazy.
season. Yeah, I mean, look, with the Bruins going out, that makes no sense. Although the President's Trophy winner often has very bad luck in the playoffs. With the defending champion Avalanche being eliminated by the Seattle Kraken, who are a very new team. I mean, just the playoffs are a second season. It's just a second season. Everything goes out the window in the playoffs. Unlike other sports, certain other sports, and I'm thinking about the NFL, where the regular season record, because you're only playing one game a week and it's so few games in the season, it really kind of extends into the playoffs. But anything can happen in any sport, and we've seen it a lot in the first round of the NHL playoffs this year.
Yeah, and for that reason, often said that the Stanley Cup might be the hardest professional sports trophy to win anywhere. Just the sheer grind of doing it. Everybody had Boston winning, right? Everybody had them coming out of the East. Maybe Toronto was going to play them in the final, but on paper, there's no way it shouldn't be, a Las Vegas and a Bruins final or something. I mean, that's what the paper said, right?
Well, and the interesting thing is, I think Leaf fans were also so thrilled about Boston being eliminated, because had it been against Boston, I think that would have gotten into the Leafs' head as well, having to face Boston in the second round.
Yeah, and we know that what the history is. Although I did note, it was nice in game 3 to be on the other end of losing 4-1 with 10 minutes to go in the game, because the Leafs came back and beat Tampa. Same scenario, right? As they did, but they lost the 7th game to Boston back in, was it 2019, I guess, something like that.
One thing I will say, I'm surprised the Leafs stunk in the first game. Stunk.
Oh, they were brutal.
I'm surprised they actually were able to win that series just based on that first game alone.
I was calling for Sheldon Keefe to be hung from the rafters, just as a reminder of what it takes to win. Because, when you get into this stuff now, it's not about drills and skill and all of that stuff. It's about coaching, preparing players for this moment. And he completely failed in game 1.
Yes.
He did. His guys were not ready, period. Now, don't know what switch he flipped, but away you go.
I'm going to lose my job, guys. I'm going to lose my job.
Maybe,
Who knows?
So at whatever stage, I don't know who stepped up. I wouldn't be shocked if it didn't happen in the room, though, because there's some guys in there who don't have that baggage, right? And they are new to the team, but experienced in the playoffs, and you got some hardware on their side to say, okay, this is what it's going to take. So I'd be curious to know, and we won't know that until after the fact,
Right.
who stepped up in that room and actually said, okay, enough bullshit. Let's get down to playing, and they learned how to win without being the best team on the ice.
Which you can do.
Tampa
Which you can absolutely do. Yes, it was a very unusual series. But again, if you've got 7 games to do it, really, anything can happen. It seems so unlikely, but we've seen it time and time again, and here we are.
So are you going to crystal ball it for us?
I was afraid you'd ask me that.
Being pensive.
I'm going to say, well, let me see what I want to say here. I don't believe there will be a sweep. There won't be a sweep from either team. I'm not sure the Leafs are going to make it out of the second round.
Yeah? Okay.
I'm not sure.
I'm going to say the Leafs will do this in 6, because I think they've got the wind under their wings. They've got everything in the rearview mirror now. They got nothing to lose. The pressure's off. And I think it's easier that it's Florida than it is Boston, because Florida's not in their head. But Florida does want to win. They're playing really tight.
I find it
hockey,
really
so-
hard to make a prediction without seeing the teams in game one. I really find that hard to do.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, if we go 2 games in and we're to chat again, I might have a very different opinion.
Well, that's the nature of being a Leaf fan.
Which I gotta
Isn't that
say,
one of those?
I grew up
All
a
right.
Leaf fan, but I'm not really a fan. Working in sports radio for so long took the fan out of me, which is kind of nice because I can watch these things a little bit more objectively. But I'm happy for the Leafs and I'm happy for the city.
Yeah. Well, we'll watch it with interest. Game 1 tonight, and the town will just be a little bit crazy if they win this first game. It's going to be like Stanley Cup plus.
Oh yes.
Which is, a little weird. All right, so we were exchanging emails this morning, and you were busy on the 1-800 what the hell happened to my credit card line, I guess, last night. Just my own experience with this kind of stuff is that the banks are getting way better at providing quick and effective service. I don't know if that was your experience.
That is my experience. I think it depends. It's almost like newer cards that I have. I get notified when large purchases are going through, which is great. I appreciate that they raise these red flags and make sure you authorized a certain charge, which happened to me yesterday. And there was a legitimate charge that was a large charge, and it got put on hold. So I had to accept it. So the person called me back. I said, yeah, it should go through now. Not a big deal. That was all great. Then I wake up this morning, have a look at my phone, and I got all of these text messages through the night. Did you authorize this charge? Did you authorize that charge? So somewhere after I called the place back this morning. It's a company, and it was a legitimate service that I paid for. Full disclosure, we got a new front door a while ago, so it was like paying the balance of that. And I called them back and I just said, I've been asked to call you. Somewhere the card got compromised right after I gave you the number, because 45 minutes later, I was told by the bank that the charges started. Did you charge $300 at Zara? No. How about $400 at Hugo Boss? No. How about $200 flowers overnight? No. And as I was talking to the person, I got another message. So they were continuing to try to use my card. The banks are definitely, I find, getting better. I've had this happen a couple of times at saying to you, okay, which charge is legit, which isn't. Okay, we're going to wipe those. But it's the huge inconvenience. Okay, cut the card, destroy it. We're sending you another card. I think most people, if you have a credit card, you probably have a backup credit card, because you know, it's good to have that just in case. Like in this case, I'm not traveling right now. I have been recently. I'm going to be again. You don't want to be without your credit card for 4 to 10 days or whatever it takes to get you the other one. But I get that people do it, but it's such a violation when someone just thinks they're entitled to take your card and go on a shopping spree.
Yeah, and I think of that every time I hand over my credit card number and the security number. On the back of your card, there's got that 3-digit number that you have to add to it to prove that you are yourself. And I know that they go to great lengths to ensure that all of that's secured and taken care of. But there are still times when, somebody over the phone says, give it to me, and you write it down. And I'm thinking, okay, what pad of paper is hanging around the phone with my name and credit card on it? So as much and all as the banks go to great lengths to do that, you got to wonder at the other end, never intending for it to get out, how secure it is at the other end, particularly when you're giving out a number over the phone.
Well, and I called the place, and I called them right before we connected this morning, and I kind of felt badly because I didn't want to suggest to the person that there was some kind of nefarious behavior on their part. But I just said, you don't know how many people have access to whatever systems you use. So just so you know, they need to know on their end. But it's interesting how the cards flag it, because some of the charges that were done overnight were charges that the amounts weren't alarming. So How do they know? Maybe it's the location. I'm not sure. Maybe it's because it's done in the middle of the night, which is not typical for my card usage. So anyway, it was taken care of. And bottom line, I agree. I think banks are getting better. I've had experiences in the past where you get your statement and say, I don't recognize this charge. I don't recognize that charge. The last couple times it's happened to me, and we're talking over a span of years, I've been able to go on the phone with someone and they cancel it out before I even get the statement.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting. And you got to wonder whether it's the pattern, the frequency of the purchases, as you point out, the locations. We just booked flights. We're heading to Europe in the fall. And as soon as you put flights on your card, boom, the bank's in your text message. We've got this activity on your card. Is it you? Yeah, it's us. So I like that. I appreciate that. That's almost being proactive as opposed to, we think your card's been compromised. Go through all the hoops of cutting it up and away you go. So, well, I'm glad to hear your whole. Now, when are you getting your new card? You're not cardless?
No, I do have a backup card or two, but I'll be getting in the next 4 to 10 days. I don't use them all, but I have them.
Good to hear. All right, yeah, just a good lesson in credit card security. Last week, I went on a bit of a rant about the LCBO deciding that they were going to ban paper bags from the stores over the coming months and so on. And I thought, okay. And one of the reasons that was given was that it was going to save X number of thousands of trees. And I thought, okay, it sounds nice that it sounds like you're taking care of the environment, but not to get too far down in the weeds, but that bag actually captures carbon. And if we don't use the materials that are left over from a harvest of the tree that you would normally use to create paper, it's going to either decay and rot, emit carbon, or it's going to burn and emit carbon. So you're not really saving trees in that respect, typically because in this part of the world, when you cut a tree down, we actually plant a new one. So there's a whole cycle involved here. And I went on a bit of a rant about all of that. And one of the things that popped back into my inbox was, the whole idea of the reusable bags. Well, they're not biodegradable, and you can't really recycle them. So at some point, you're going to have a garage full of all of these fabric bags that you are collecting because inevitably, oh, damn, I forgot. Do you want a bag? Yeah, you got to spend 35 cents and buy a new bag or whatever it happens to be. And there was a story back in December about the Walmart plastic bag ban and all these people who were actually getting the reusable bags because they were going to Walmart to buy their groceries. So they'd order the groceries, show up, picking them up curbside. Well, of course, they were always in these reusable bags. Now, Walmart won't take the bag back, so this one particular family literally had a room full of these bags, and that creates more of an environmental hazard than the plastic bag that they were using. So I'm not quite sure we're all on the side of the angels when we start talking about the bag ban.
There's so much material there. I don't know where to start. Let me start with the Walmart thing because I find that one really hit and miss. I don't tend to shop there very often, but I have shopped there throughout all of this. And I've heard that story. I've heard that people get all of these bags. I know that to be true. I've also picked up stuff there where they come out to the car and they have it just in big plastic bins. And I've seen people have to load up all their groceries individually just into their trunk. So they don't have anything. So you can go there not sure if your stuff is going to be in bags or if it's not going to be in bags. With the LCBO, I had a real issue when I heard about this paper bag ban. So the government starts out with banning plastic bags, even though Canada is not a top offender when it comes to plastics and things like that in the environment. Fine. My belief is it is on a retailer as part of their service to give you something to take your purchase away in. You should not have purchasing a bag as the only option if you don't bring a reusable bag. I have a ton of reusable bags. I carry them everywhere. Every once in a while I'm out. I didn't bring them because I wasn't planning to go shopping. You need to get something. And I'll often just say, no, I'm not going to pay for a bag. I was at a clothing store not long ago, and some do and some don't, but I was at this clothing store and I happened to already be carrying a big reusable bag. Made a purchase. Do you want a bag? I said, do you want a bag for 35 cents? No, thank you. I'll just put it, So you're not giving me an alternative. What is to stop someone from going into this clothing retailer, grabbing something off the shelf, pulling out some random receipt and just walking out of the store? Because you're not offering bags, so there's nothing obvious to show that someone is stealing if they're walking out of the store holding merchandise that's not in a bag. I just think generally this is a way for stores to just save more money. And I really think it's part of their service that they should provide something. And I think paper bags are the answer. So for the LCBO to ban the paper bags, I think is ridiculous. I appreciate you can do the boxes, so at least there's an alternative, but I'm not buying their reasoning. And what you just explained about the trees makes me believe it even more so, that it's ridiculous for them to say we're helping the environment by banning these paper bags.
Well, I'll just point out that the cardboard box that you're carrying it out in is a paper product that requires trees to be harvested. So,
but if you take
doesn't make any sense.
Well, it does though, because you're doing their recycling for them. If you take the box away, and they don't have to break it down and put it into recycling.
Well, I have that issue. We've tried HelloFresh. Have you seen those? That they
I have not tried it, but I'm aware of it.
Groceries in it and the recipes in it. Well, and it's actually it's a little expensive, but in a pinch, if you got a rough week or something, then it works, because even an idiot like me can actually follow the recipe and cook something that's edible and nobody will complain about. And they have this great cooler box, but they don't take it back, right? And to me, and it's a very specialized box because it does provide insulation. It's not just an ordinary cardboard box. And I said to my wife, I'm thinking we should stop doing that just on principle and let them know. I'd be happy to, renew the service, but take the box back when you drop off the next piece and use it again. There's no reason why they can't use that again. Where is it going? Well, it's being recycled. And of course, just the effort of recycling causes a carbon footprint. So to me, I just think there are so many stages along the way where retailers and services like that could say, to your point, here's the bag, bring it back to us. There's same as there's a deposit on the bottle that you bought at the LCBO. We'll kind of cover it off the same way. There's some incentive to keep it in the system. But otherwise, it's just way too much of a hassle. And it's greenwashing in so many respects. They're just ticking boxes, and clearly that's ticked you off.
I don't know if you're familiar with this, because it sounds like you've done a little bit of work or research into this area, but I received something in the mail about a month ago in a bag that it said, do not recycle this bag. It is compostable. Mm-hmm. And, maybe that's an option that retailers should look at. I don't know if it's going too far. I do believe, and I do use reusable bags. So I'm not one who just, wants free plastic bags. Not really, but plastic bags and paper bags do get recycled in our house. We have many uses for them. And so I think that these reusable bags, and you end up with just too many of them, which we probably all have too many of them, I think it defeats the purpose. And I still think part of the retail service is to provide something for your customers to take their purchases home in. That's a hill I choose to die on.
Yeah. Okay. So, and to your point about the compostable bag, you can actually buy those bags in a package for your green bin. Right. So,
okay.
I mean, it just doesn't make any sense to me all around. So that's all good fun. All right. So yesterday, we got into a conversation about Bare Minimum Monday. And the whole point of Bare Minimum Monday was to ostensibly, deal with your mental health, the state of your mental health on a Monday to start the work week, and to get over the Sunday scaries, as they say. And there was a young woman who posted this story on TikTok and talked about how she plans her Monday, and she does whatever work is needed to get done and accomplished on that Monday, and then otherwise leaves room for, things that she wants to get done around the house that she doesn't want to chew up her weekend doing. So immediately people turn to it as being, it's kind of a lazy hack, right? You're just going to do bare minimum, and immediately, I called it mail it in Monday. Having said that, we do that kind of thing at Story Studio Network. Our Mondays are depressurized. The beginning of the day is kind of left open to everybody to kind of, choose your own adventure. Midday, we'll have a team meeting to see where everybody's at, where projects are, what our plan is for the rest of the week. But we don't have client-facing meetings. We rarely have any heavy production schedules. I mean, I produce this show off the side of my desk on a Monday, but that's kind of it. And then we really focus on the middle of the week, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, to get the bulk of the work done. And then Friday is kind of a hybrid day where we take that first half of the day, let's get everything ready, set to go. And if you can put tools down at 1 o'clock on a Friday, go ahead. If you have to work through it or you want to work through it, go ahead. But we've found, now it's a small group, but we have found that we're way more productive Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday when we can depressurize the Monday.
Look, I love that you guys do that. And as you're describing that, this is slightly different, but when I was working evenings at the radio station, and I had really long days because I was searching for content all day long before going in and doing a show from 7 to 10 every night, I developed this strict rule that I would never schedule anything for myself on a Monday before noon, whether it was an appointment, meeting someone, because I just needed a way to mentally ease into the start of the week, that my week didn't end until Friday night at 10 p.m. I think generally, I feel like we're all moving in this different direction. I don't think it's a bad thing. I'm a believer in what you guys are doing. And I do believe that if you allow people to have a little bit more flexibility, especially at the start of the week, you do feel more productive. You will be more productive for the following few days. The problem is, if you work for a big company and they don't agree with that, how does that go along with what they want people to be doing? The Sunday scaries, you mentioned that, I think is a real thing for a lot of people. I have a friend who just doesn't sleep well Sunday night into Monday and has been like that for years. People might look at it and say, are we becoming soft? But if the work gets done and we can find a smarter way to do it, how would that be a bad thing?
Yeah, precisely. And it just, you talked about the big companies and we're going to lay down the law and so on. We're seeing the rubber hit the road in that respect in a lot of areas, i.e. remote work versus in the office, and the demand. It doesn't matter what you do, you have to be in the office 5 days a week,
right,
or on whatever schedule they demand. This is getting at the heart of engagement. And so much of what we've talked about in this part of the pandemic recovery is retention of staff, creating a culture where people feel like they don't just own their time, they own what they're producing. They actually are part of that. Everybody's pulling together. I'm on the team. We can collaborate. It makes it easier to actually look at productivity from the perspective that you've described, and that is get it done by this time, period. And if you want to work until 2 o'clock in the morning, go nuts. I know a couple of guys I work with on some video production projects, and they don't start working until 11 o'clock at night, and they finish at 3 in the morning.
Right.
That's just their rhythm. So let them do it. Who cares when it gets done? I think this is going to lead to a broader redefinition of sort of that corporate culture. We're just going to see a shift in that over the next 5 years. We're going to see an emergence of new skill sets for the leaders of this post-pandemic era, because what you're talking about would never have been adopted, considered, talked about seriously, given the leadership mindset pre-pandemic of so many places.
It's so true, but I will say the seeds were being planted once smartphones were introduced, and once the 9 to 5 day didn't end at 5 and people were working into the evening hours. So we started to see that pre-pandemic, but there was such a resistance to doing remote work, anything like that. And then pandemic hit. I believe in many ways a huge disruptor for the working world, huge disruptor, because companies were forced to do the very thing they were against in order to keep their company going. So now we come out of it and we've got people, as we just saw with the federal workers, demanding that remote work be a consideration into contract situations, and also places like yours working smartly, figuring out, as long as we get it done, let's figure out how this works best for us. Add to that, younger adults entering the workforce. If there are enough of them that are brought up in this sort of mindset and are starting to demand it, well, as you said, retaining employees, how do you do that? People want to have a little bit more flexibility. So I think it's a number of things that factor into it. And while on the surface, I'm thinking of it as mail-in Mondays. What did you call it?
Yeah, mail it in Monday.
Mail it in Monday. I mean, it sounds lazy, but it's part of a smarter way of working. That doesn't mean you're only working a half day Monday and Friday. You could be working a day and a half Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, as you guys do.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, and so their label was bare minimum Monday.
Yes.
I said it just sounds to me like mail it in Monday, right? So, and we would all kind of joke at that. But the only thing I'll leave you with is the part of that conversation with the federal employees. Some of the analysis I read was really interesting, and it was about the number of managers there are in a department whose sole job, almost entire job, is to make sure they're keeping up on who's in the office and doing what work at what time and what deadlines are being met at what meetings they're attending, right? And we've been there. We've seen that happen.
Yes.
Well, now if people are working remotely and still getting the job done, that manager's just sitting in the swivel chair rotating. There's nothing for them to do. So that's, all of a sudden we realize the redundancy is there. We don't need that person. So I can see how there's pushback culturally in some levels, but we're gonna have to.
Things change. Hey,
you bet. Tuck and roll, and away we go. Right, make it happen. Barb, it's always good to have you join us. A lengthy discussion.
What a great long conversation.
Well, it was good. It was good, and glad you were here to talk about Gordon Lightfoot. All right, that'll do it for us. It is Now and Next. Dave Trafford with Barb Digiulio. It's Story Studio Network. Now and Next is produced by Becky Coles. Our production manager is Jamie Nickerson. Audio editors are Mike Trutler and Drew Garner. And our sonic logo designer is Greg McDonald. Our executive producers are Dave and Aaron Trafford.
This is SSN.
Story Studio Network.